Welcome to this afternoon's event. I'm Marc Rachovides from Euromines. I also do various other things, but please call me Marc. I will be your moderator today. I have an eminent set of speakers. We are going to have a keynote speech, followed by a panel discussion. After that, we will be inviting questions. Sylvia, may I ask you, will you have time for questions, or do you have another commitment?
Normally, one or two, but
we'll keep it to one or two.
Then I have to rush off, I'm afraid.
That's fine. Okay, we will have an audience online. That audience online, if you can hear me online, I'm assuming you can, but I'm not going to stop anyway. For the audience online, I apologize that we're not able to allow you to ask questions, and because we have an audience online, Chatham House rules do not apply. So please be careful what you say, ladies and gentlemen. On that note, I need to advise you of the safety protocols here. Very simply, we are not apparently expecting a fire alarm drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, we should basically retrace our steps out of that door, following obviously the green sign. And as to the rest, when we come to questions, I'd be very, very happy to receive questions. Please, please, please lift your hand up so a microphone can come to you, announce who you are, and I'm very happy to take questions and interventions. What I don't want to have to deal with are prepared interventions. So if you do have a speech that you'd like to make, please save it for another occasion. So, ladies and gentlemen, with, of course, the exception of our keynote speaker. No, you're not getting off quite so easily. So, I'm going to introduce Sylvia Kainz-Huber, who is the head of unit at DG DEFIS from the European Commission, stepping in at short notice to be our keynote speaker. I don't think I should offer any greater preamble than that. You will set the scene for us, so would you like to come up and sit with me, or however you would prefer to issue your statement? Thank you very much, Sylvia.
Okay.
Can we give a round of applause?
So, first of all, it's really an honor to be here, even if I'm only replacing my Director-General, but I hope you will appreciate nevertheless. On my person, I'm dealing with the European Defence Fund implementation, so really from the Directorate dealing with defence industry policy in DG DEFIS. So very hands-on, very practical experience. I also dealt with the implementation of the more recent EIES and the ASAP program, which might ring a bell a little bit with you as well. Here we're talking really about ammunition production and all the bottlenecks which we encountered, and the supply chains which we actually had to focus on, and discovered that it's not the production of shells, it's actually what comes before, which is really what we need to focus on. So, but now let me focus on what I'm supposed to do here and why I came here, talk and open up with a keynote speech and set the scene with a keynote speech. And I would like to start with by underlining we're at the moment really, and I think everybody knows, at a critical juncture. The post-Cold War political equilibrium, which we knew and which we all were familiar with for the past year, is severely challenged. Russia poses a fundamental and long-lasting threat to our security, both military and challenging, but also our democratic values, our democratic societies, open societies. Europe wants peace. I think that has also been underlined several times by all our policymakers and policy figures in the past. But therefore, we must deter any temptation of military aggression from whomever. And this means we need to be ready for any type of war or any war that could be imposed to us by hostile powers such as Russia. It also means we have to act collectively with determination and a clear strategy, and this is what the Commission put forward now over the past weeks, or some very recently, to uphold our way of life, and I already mentioned it, our open, free, democratic states and societies as we know them. As the title of the event today rightly says, we also witness a war below for Europe's defense. This war, and I have just given you a bit of a glimpse to that we're also, despite the fact that our focus is defense, are aware of the underlying problems which we see. So war about resources and raw materials that impact our collective society, our technological sovereignty, our economic resilience. A wide range of key technologies across all industries, from chips, batteries, medical imaging to tanks and military equipment, rely on the unique physical properties of certain critical raw materials. These essential resources underpin the capabilities of our defense and space industries, which is our business in DG Defis. Ensuring their secure and sustainable supply is no longer just an industrial policy objective. It is really a strategic imperative which we have to keep in mind. This is recognized in the recent Draghi and Letta reports, which both contain helpful ideas and proposals that we will use also when we shape now our ideas on what we can do in order to strengthen the European defense industrial base. But please allow me now to first update you a bit on, before I go actually into the matter of raw materials, as to what we have put on the table recently now on 19 March. So the Commission's white paper, Readiness 2030, and the ReArm Europe plan are at the core of establishing what we call a posture of credible deterrence, because that is what we want to achieve, and deliver the security on which our prosperity depends. The white paper is, if you so wish, a political framework for the ReArm Europe plan that was put forward at the same time and announced earlier also by Commission President von der Leyen, laying out the case for a once-in-a-generation surge of investment in the defense domain, in the defense industry. That white paper sets out 4 priorities on how we can achieve this, what we call defense readiness, which is this credible case of deterrence by 2030. First of all, unwavering support to Ukraine, very clear, through increased military support, but also through the integration of the Ukrainian defense industry or industrial base, as we call it, into our European defense industrial base. And there are very concrete things we're already doing under ongoing programs, not only in the terms of so really trying to integrate, for example, Ukrainian companies in the European Defence Fund within the legal frame which we have, but already very concretely cooperating with them, learning from those companies who have an incredible, who are incredible innovators, and there is a lot we can benefit from it by already cooperating now in that domain. Plugging and dealing and addressing critical defense capability gaps. They are all identified. The list is long. It's also mentioned in the strategy document, so in the white paper that has been put forward. So all in line with what is done and the priorities that have been identified both at EU and at NATO level. Promoting increased defense readiness by strengthening military mobility. We not only need arms, we need weapons, we need systems, but we also need transport. And here again, focusing more on making military mobility more efficient and also promoting stockpiling to speed up the availability of defense products when we need them and when we're really under pressure and attacked. Strengthening, last point, the European defence industry by increasing demand predictability. This is what industry always wants us to do, a one-shot sort of procurement contract doesn't help. They need long-term predictability, that there is really aggregated demand at a certain scale, not just small-scale procurement contracts that are put to them, so that the industry is then also ready to react and to really ramp up their production capacities. With the ReArm Europe plan, the Commission is creating the conditions for a unique, as I said, it's a defense investment surge, and that is really, really true. We expect that with the instruments put forward, we can expect an investment volume of up to 800 billion across the EU for defense expenditure that will be enabled through the instruments which we have put in place, and which should materialize already in the coming 4, 5, 6 years. So let me now turn to the topic that is on the table, that is of the meeting today, strategic importance of critical raw materials. So critical raw materials are, and we understand that, the backbone of our most advanced technologies, from high-performance military equipment to satellite and space exploration systems. Let me just provide a few examples. Rare earth elements, lithium, titanium, or cobalt are indispensable for radar systems, jet engines, semiconductors, and missile guidance systems. So actually within the systems we're trying to jointly develop at EU level every day. Without them, our strategic autonomy is at risk, and so is our ability to defend and protect European values and interests. The European defense sector's material supply chain involves various stages, such as the supply of raw materials, materials refining, processing, for example, metals alloying and composite production, or conversion into semi-finished and finished products. Europe's defense industrial base requires specialized high-performance processed and semi-finished materials for the production of its defense applications. And we know from studies done over the past years that we have about 39 raw materials that are necessary to manufacture such advanced materials in the defense and in the space domain. What we also know that the EU today is almost 100% dependent on imports for half of these 39 raw materials. So we're very conscious also for our domain that raw materials really is a key issue, and securing the supply chains is as well. Just one example, graphite, which we wanted to highlight. It is one of the most used materials in defense. We find it in aircrafts, amphibious assault ships, submarines, tanks, artillery, and missiles. Yet China has a 67% share of the global graphite production, so just another example to highlight the importance of the matter also for us in the defense domain. In today's volatile geopolitical climate, the risks to critical raw materials supply chains are stark. The war in Ukraine has just exposed Europe's dependence on external sources for energy and raw materials. Over the recent years, we are witnessing an escalating global competition for resources and technologies, as these will shape the future of our economies and societies. Examples of that is the approach that China has been following now on critical raw materials. So China has, for example, imposed export restrictions on gallium and germanium since August 23, two strategic raw materials for China, for which it is the main EU supplier. This has led to a near doubling of the gallium prices in Europe, and moreover, germanium prices increased by 52% between June and August 2024 on suspected stockpiling by China. Export controls on graphite have also been put in place since October 2023, and furthermore, China has banned the export of rare earth processing technology since December 2023. Such practices have resulted in a rethinking and the re-emergence of industrial policies globally, also in order to secure the supply of critical raw materials, underscoring the urgency for Europe to strengthen its own supply chains and avoid over-reliance on external actors. The European Commission has recognized those threats and is taking decisive actions to ensure that our defense and space industries remain resilient and competitive. In the context of its strategy to foster the Union's technological sovereignty and economic security, the Commission is advancing in the implementation of the Critical Raw Material Act. The Act stresses the importance of defense and space industries and sets clear targets for extraction, processing and recycling within the EU. The aim is to secure, you probably know that, at least 10% of our critical raw materials needs are covered from domestic sources, and to ensure that 15% of our annual consumption is met through recycling. Just a few days ago, on 25 March, the Commission adopted for the first time a list of 47 so-called strategic projects to boost domestic strategic raw material capacities, which will in turn strengthen the European raw materials value chain and diversify sources of supply. That is a very important milestone for us here in the Commission, also in the implementation of the Act. The 47 new strategic projects are located across 13 EU member states, and let me quickly name them. It's Belgium, it's France, it's Italy, it's Germany, it's Spain, it's Estonia, Czechia, Greece, Sweden, Finland, Portugal, Poland and Romania, and they cover one or more segments of the raw material value chain. Several of that projects address raw materials essential also for us here in the defense industry domain. I'm just referring to 3 projects that are on tungsten, which is used, for instance, for armor-piercing ammunition and aerospace, 1 project on magnesium, also used in aerospace, and 11 projects that focus on, which I've already mentioned, graphite. The Commission will now work with member states and public and private financial institutions to ensure that those projects really see the light of day by coordinating their access to finance and ensuring to a streamlined permitting process. Completing these efforts under its raw material diplomacy, the Commission also aims at securing access to critical raw materials through strategic partnerships and policy dialogues. So here we have engaged, or the EU is engaging or has engaged in strategic partnerships with resource-rich third countries. And by July 2024, it had signed 14 such strategic partnerships on raw materials, amongst them with Ukraine, Canada and Greenland. Let me also quickly highlight 2 elements that are paramount for us to secure access to raw materials. The one is really the strategic stockpiling. I mentioned it already as part of the package and the defense package that the Commission has put forward, and the new program EDIP, which is still under discussion and negotiation in Council. Here we must really prepare for, or the aim is to prepare for supply disruptions. The Commission is working, amongst other measures, to activate and extend the EU's aggregate demand mechanisms beyond gas, where we already apply it, to include critical raw materials through an EU critical raw materials platform to support joint purchasing and manage strategic stockpiles in such materials. Through, and here I come again to EDIP, the program, the European Defence Industrial Programme proposal, which is in negotiation with Council, and where we hope that negotiations will be finalized very soon. We could also facilitate investment and efforts in stockpiling by a group of member states of critical raw materials that are relevant for the defence domain. And I'm gave you an example earlier on. For me, ammunition production was really the first very clear experience for us, where we saw how important raw material plus supply chains can be in a very concrete case. There is also another instrument in the program that might be useful for that domain, and that is really the European defence projects of common European interest. So we will see how we can use that new cooperation instrument in that domain. The second area is then circular economy and recycling. So a sustainable approach to critical raw materials requires us also to think how we deal with waste management. The European Commission is actively supporting research and innovation in CRM recycling technology, so that machinery or materials also from decommissioned military and space equipment and assets are effectively reused. So increasing our recycling rates will reduce reliance on imports and strengthen our technological independence. So from that point of view, we know it's difficult, we know it requires design built in, and that it will take time, but we are still convinced that this is an area we need to work on. Last point, let me go a bit also in the geopolitical context. Further, what we see is that the global competition on critical raw materials is intensifying. The US-China trade war has already demonstrated how raw materials can be weaponized, and the war in Ukraine has further reinforced the need to have a robust, independent European defence sector. So therefore, the Rearm Europe proposal aims at enhancing European defence capabilities, increasing joint procurement of critical military assets, reduce strategic dependencies on third countries, and as part of this initiative, the critical raw materials supply security will be a pillar of that new strategy, which we are implementing hopefully very swiftly in the coming months. Furthermore, already in 2024, the European Defence Industrial Strategy included measures to bolster European resilience, incentivizing public and private investment in CRM-related projects. This is a call to action for member states, industry leaders, research institutions to collaborate on securing supply chain autonomy in that domain. To succeed these efforts, we need coordinated actions at all levels, from policymakers to industry leaders to researchers to defence experts, and the European Commission is really committed to boost or go ahead and push ahead very quickly in 4 areas: investing in innovation, strengthening public-private partnerships in that domain, enhancing, as I already mentioned, international partnerships, and implementing in a stronger regulatory framework in that area. So let me conclude. Coming back to my statement, yes, Europe stands at a crossroad at the moment. We can either continue to rely on unstable and sometimes adversarial external resources for our materials that underpin our defence and space industries, or we can act with bold action to secure our future and our future supplies. The European Commission has set a clear path forward with the Critical Raw Materials Act, with programs such as the EDIP, the envisaged strategic stockpiling. It includes and it provides for enhanced recycling, and the Rearm Europe initiatives. We are strengthening our industrial base, also including our defence industrial base to make it more resilient to external shocks and to ensure that Europe remains a leader in defence and space technology. So with that, I wish you a fruitful event with that outlook, or a little bit the insights also how that raw materials topic plays a critical role also in what we do in the defence and the space domain. So I wish you a successful and fruitful event with fruitful and interesting discussions. Hopefully, we will also learn a little bit about the outcomes of and recommendations that come from your event today. And DG Steffis is always ready to consider those good ideas also in that important field of action in the context of the implementation of its own defense industrial strategy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. Ladies and gentlemen, Sylvia, you said you'd take one or two questions. Does your schedule still allow for that? I know lots and lots of people in this room. What I would like to know is, please raise your hand if you're not involved in the mining or raw materials sector. I just want to know how diverse our audience is. No, I know about the panelists, that's all right. But, okay, so mainly a raw materials audience, but I do want to give other people the opportunity to speak because I think it's really important to hear other perspectives. So if we raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Nicholas in the front, I saw you. This very eager gentleman as well. But go on, please identify yourself, sir.
Yeah, I'm Guy de Cellier. I am the chairman of a raw materials company in Canada. And yesterday I was at La Rochelle with Solvay inaugurating a major new facility for producing NdPr. And I was talking to a French official about stockpiles, strategic stockpiles. I think they are critical, in particular for small materials like rare earths and other, or graphite and things like that, which are, could be hostage to disruption. But he said, yeah, but who's got the money to do it? And I discussed it with some of your colleagues in the commission. They said, we don't have the money, so it'll have to be the state spending the money. And then the French representative said, well, why should we spend the money so that you can sell your goods at a higher price? So it looks like everybody's pointing to each other. We're talking about stockpiles, but where is the money for these stockpiles? They are absolutely critical, strategic stockpiles for truly critical raw materials. Where's the money?
Mr. de Cellier, did you used to work at EBRD?
Yes.
Then we're former colleagues, and you don't remember me, but it's an ancient history. But it's nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you.
So, Sylvia, please, Guy asked you a very, very relevant question to today's
Yes,
challenges.
I can only, but where's the money? I understand this is extra costs, and I can't now really, I'm not, don't take me, I'm one of the outsiders here in the room as well. I'm coming from the defense domain. I can only tell you what we plan and under the European Defence Industrial Programme in the making, where then in member states could trigger that mechanism of stockpiling in urgent cases and oblige actors to actually do the stockpiling. It's true. It's not that we would support that financially in a sense and say we recompensate or compensate those actors then for increased costs due to the stockpiling. It would be a mechanism that member states could really trigger if they feel that in a crisis situation. And then again, I'm coming back. We have seen that with ammunition production, where you could see that these supply chains were really where we had to literally pay for the production of it. So I'm not talking about the raw materials as such. I'm really talking about powder, explosives. So we're already probably a bit of a step further than raw materials. But we were very practically confronted with that problem that if these stocks aren't there and you have a surge and a need for producing in an emergency and a crisis context, ammunition in Europe, you need to also look into that problem of supply chains and where also including raw material supply. So that's why I quoted the possibility of that program to trigger that mechanism. But you're right, I can't answer your question where the money comes from. It surely won't come from the European Defence Industrial Programme, I'm afraid, where we are ready to support any expansion of production capacity in that domain. Yes, for example, pyrogen explosives, not only needed for ammunition production, but it's also other military equipment where this is vital at the end. But it's not that we would support actually this or compensate the costs for stocking, if you so wish.
We have a small queue of questions. Nicholas first, then Dirk, and then the young lady over there.
Thank you very much, Mark. Niklas Johansson from LKB. We presently mine about 80% of all iron ore mined in the European Union. We also were just awarded 3 strategic projects for extracting and processing REEs. We feel very keenly the need for our materials in these value chains and the political need to actually access these fast. But at the same time, we see European politics not really being coherent here. How do we make sure that we, even though we get strategic projects for some of these things, can actually start mining these? And we are looking for something which will not cost money. So I'm not going to ask for that, but more of omnibuses for where you revisit some of the environmental legislation and things that are actually stopping this. And we believe if we can't do that, we will have problems in Europe accessing these materials going forward. Will we see GD deficits as a strong proponent for omnibuses for more better regulation and coherency here?
We're actually, yes, we love omnibuses, and we will do an omnibus on defense. It's in the making. It will come in June, where we will really focus on the 3 parts. First of all, what can we do? But that is very much focused on EU legislation, touching on defense procurement and defense transfers, where we are ready and simplify whatever needs to be simplified to ensure that there is joint procurement of defense equipment, supply chain products, etc. are incentivized and encouraged, and do away with any hurdles that I would say actors concerned see. But it's also any type of legislation. You're referring now to environmental legislations and rules, which we see that hinders and is an obstacle in the defense domain, whether it is the joint procurement, whether it is production increase and ramp up of production capacities, where, again, we learned a lot also from the ammunition production initiative during the Ukraine crisis about a year ago, that it isn't just about money and just about the demand, which needs to be there, but it's also a lot about, I referred to it, permits, any kind of administrative procedures, or any other conflicting laws that might also hamper this production rise, which we would have liked to see. And which can also delay it for a long time. And here, sort of the omnibus will also be about that. There is, by the way, a public consultation going on still until 22nd of April. So it's focused, of course, what's in the defense domain. But here again, the link to raw materials and also the next, I would say, final supply chain products is there. So feel free to, as a representative also of industry, to say, and mining or not, or whether you are also related a bit to a certain production in the defense domain, to point out what these rules, pieces of law, I'm talking about REACH, I'm talking about whether it's the taxonomy for access to finance, which we're very, very, very much aware that this is a real issue for the defense industry in our domain. It's due to the taxonomy not being put in a very advantageous situation when it comes to access to financing. So all these things, please do point them out. We have a lot already on our, I would say, radar, where we are aware also from notably industrial stakeholders what they see as a problem, and we will tackle that where we can in the context of the defense omnibus in June.
Dirk, and then the young lady over there, and then I think we probably should allow the panelists to come and make their contribution, so please.
Thank you. And I think, Mark, you know what I'm going to say.
No, I do.
About essential raw materials, because we're talking about critical and strategic raw materials. But you mentioned actually essential raw materials for weapon products, and that is encouraging. Germany has 500 billion euro announced for infrastructure and whatever it takes for military. And you mentioned the 800 billion euros. So on the investment side, that sounds encouraging. But for example, you mentioned, I think it was military mobility and transport, which is important. Rail Baltica is actually predominantly a civilian project, but has a great value for NATO and for military mobility. My question is, we're talking all about critical and strategic raw materials, but not about all the other raw materials needed for military mobility. And how is the Commission intend to ensure the supply of all the other raw materials? And when I'm actually for Aggregates Europe, we're talking not in thousands or millions, we're talking about billions of tons of supply.
We're already having, let's say, within the whole policy domain of transport area, this military mobility action plan. Now, I'm not a specialist now exactly in that domain either, which looks at all different components in order to how to increase, to improve, to simplify what needs to be done, to also trigger investments now in the public transport system, rail transport, most of all across Europe, which is a problem here also with high interest from the NATO side to say how can we work together to really ensure that our rail infrastructure and transport infrastructure is really capable of transporting what we need from A to Z across Europe and to any kind of front line, which is critical now. Whether this now covers also critical raw materials, or, as you said, non-critical raw materials, but raw materials beyond the criticality list, if you so wish, that are relevant for military mobility, I can't say. But we will also in that domain come up really with soon with an action list of what we think now we need to do in the context of the white paper, which is a clear activity which were also highlighted there, that we will pay further attention to that. Whether that area, when it comes to that and goes that far, could be, but I can only, as an interested stakeholder, always tell you, point that out also in this, for example, public consultation that is ongoing. It could also cover that area and that domain.
Please, you've been very patient. Could we pass the microphone over? And please identify yourself, as we haven't met.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the voice. I'm Julie Ruot. I work for Marjolaine Sbailly in the European Parliament. She is the MEP and the rapporteur on critical raw materials for INTA on the monitoring group that was just set up. Hence, my question would be, you described how important the strategic partnerships are going to be in the overall strategy and making sure we get this CRM. I'm just wondering why the legal basis that has been chosen by the Commission that is really not constraining and so on, the memorandum of understanding, I say, is basically completely excluding the European Parliament from any decision. And we see the drawback when it comes to this with the Rwanda case. So this would be my first question. And the second is the first 47 projects that have been published were only in Europe, but there is also going to be a list outside Europe. And I'm just wondering, I thought it would be on the same day. So why has it been a delay? And when will be the next list published? Thank you so much.
Okay. I understood a little bit the first part. You're talking about the safe regulation and the fact that it's on basis on Article 122.
No, not specifically
So-
this regulation, just the fact that the partnerships that are being made throughout the world with the different countries are with what you mentioned with Greenland, the Memorandum of Understanding. And on this, the European Parliament has no say, basically. So I'm just wondering, on the long term, whether the absence of public scrutiny and the impossibilities of the Parliament to say anything on this is a good idea or not. So this is what I'm just trying to see.
I'm in the lucky position that I don't have to answer to your question, because I will have to refer you to my colleagues in DG GROW, who are then really also dealing with those partnerships and on what legal base and has been used for negotiating and completing them. If the European Parliament had no say in it, it wasn't here in DG DEFIS that we made that decision. So I'm afraid I'm not the competent partner to go into such depth on the background of these, partnerships, the way they were negotiated, and I would have to refer you to the competent colleagues in DG GROW, I'm afraid.
And I think that's the same answer for the second part of your question, and I think speaking for the mining industry, we would all like to know the answer to that question as well. But we're hoping it'll be forthcoming in the coming days. Sylvia, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure. We've taken far too much of your time. I very much enjoyed your contribution. It was salutary, I think, that we're facing new challenges today. I never thought I would actually wish for the challenges we had about a year ago. But I think I know what I would prefer. Well, who knows? I mean, it's day by day at the moment in some respects. But anyway, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure having you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Please. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I have to offer two apologies. Firstly, one to Anna Zanetti, who's been standing. She's our communications and events manager over there. Anna, wave at everybody, please. Because I was supposed to do some sort of fancy technological thing, but we've launched straight into a discussion, and I don't think we need to do that. And secondly, a more heartfelt apology to the person I've replaced, David Rose, who was supposed to be here as our moderator. Many of you know David. He's been unwell. I'm sure you'll join me in wishing him a speedy recovery. Those points now taken, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to join me up on the stage. In no particular order, I'll ask Mr. Lukas Mandl from the European Parliament, a member representing the European People's Party. Please. Isabelle Dupraz from the European Initiative for Energy Security. Cecilia Pechmeze from her own law firm, who's going to give us a perspective on the defence sector from the legal side. And last but not least, Christian Lifländer from NATO. So Christian, please. Please. So we're terrible in time-wise, but that's because we had such a good discussion. And I would like to continue a discussion. So please feel free to express yourselves in the most fulsome way you wish, but I would like the audience to come back. I very much enjoyed that interaction, and I'd like it to continue. So let's stay with the Parliament, as the last question was from the Parliament, and I think it's only fair that Mr. Mandl has been so patient. As a legislator, you face a suite of challenges, and as I mentioned, perhaps jokingly, the challenges of today are not the same as yesterday, and tomorrow may be worse. How can the Parliament shape our response in a more effective way? I suppose would be my basic question to you. I don't mean by a call to arms, and no pun intended on that, but what can the Parliament do to enable change in response to change?
Thank you very much for having me, first of all, and for the opportunity to exchange. Thanks to all of you for traveling to Brussels, to our European capital, I might say, for a deliberation on all these issues which are of crucial importance. So thank you, Mark, for highlighting the big question, how can the European Parliament support the right way forward? As a parliamentarian, I would briefly say via better majorities. And this is easier to be said than to be done, but what I want to convey to you is, to all of you, is that I think I can confirm we have better majorities in this mandate after the changes last year. We have a commission more dedicated to the priorities. It's a bit sad that it needed, obviously, our defense understanding, our security priority, a war in the end, and many other circumstances of tensions globally to wake up and to, for example, set a priority on raw materials, on mining, something we have advocated for already before Putin-Russia's war and other events, but at least it happened. We have better majorities. The Commission focuses on better priorities. It was a delight to hear from the Commission representatives that we will have a defense omnibus in June. That's what she just said. And as a parliamentarian, I closely listen to what the Commission representatives say, because I stick to the things that they promise if they are positive, and I try to avoid them if they are negative. But this is something, and this might be the right way ahead. To make it more concrete, last week in the European Parliament's plenary session in Strasbourg, we had our vote on the so-called stop the clock procedure when it comes to omnibus in the field of sustainability reporting and in the field of our new supply chain rules. And we might have now the opportunity to really overcome this over-bureaucratization, this over-regulation, and achieve something that's in the best way meant to be called deregulation. And this will be necessary for prosperity, and this will be necessary for our autonomous approach. We heard about the dependencies from other parts of the world, and I do not want to be too pessimistic, and when I say it, maybe in a year from now you would be happy about the challenges of today, even while you're happy about, or you would be happy about the challenges today we had a year ago, but it's in our hands. I mean, there are major parts of the world, and unfortunately I cannot only look to the east anymore. When I state that, I have also to look to the west at the moment, even under very different circumstances, but there are major parts of the world who do want to colonize us, and this is sad to be said in the year 2025, when we think we would have overcome, for example, geographical demands from other countries. We have talked about Greenland. Somebody talked about Greenland already today. Obviously, some questions are back on the table. We will respond to them. We will do it with strength, but also with the typical European approach to cooperation. This is what we want to do, and this is why it's in our hands whether in a year from now we will say we have overcome the challenges of that time and we will tackle the challenges of the time we will have then, or not. But I want to remain optimistic and ask all of you to have confidence and to work together as much as we can.
Thank you. I must agree that I sense a great opportunity here to make a lot of things better. And that's not meant to sound glib at all. As an industry, we've faced all sorts of challenges, which everybody in this room more or less is familiar with. We have the opportunity, through urgency, to address a lot of those challenges, be they regulatory, be they in terms of market distortions, be they in terms of costs. We have an opportunity to do that, and I think many of my colleagues will be looking to the Parliament to enable that. So in your follow-up questions, perhaps you could give that some thought. We have, of course, already faced an emergency as a result of the Ukraine war and the sanctions and other acts that followed, and that was the energy emergency. And Europe had to go through some very painful experiences and great changes, and I would contend possibly some regret in responding to the crisis of not being able to use Russian energy anymore. Isabelle, this is very much your bailiwick. We've had some conversations between us over the last few days. Dirk, I think, alluded to the point that I think I'm trying to make, which is we look at natural resources contribution to defense as a diamond or as a triangle. There's a sharp end when we talked about bullets and aeroplanes and drones and satellites and what have you. But physically, that's a very small amount of material. What we need is everything else behind it. And the largest component of that is not only energy, but energy transmission and distribution. So please, this is your area. Tell us a little bit about how you see energy security developing and what your advice would be, not only to us as Europeans, but to our industry.
Thanks for the question and for the invitation. Just by way of introduction of EIES, the European Initiative for Energy Security, we are a think tank that was incubated by SAFE and launched in Brussels in 2023. We work on solutions that de-risk Europe's energy transition, address and mitigate supply chain dependencies, and improve European security and prosperity. Our approach is centered on establishing a shared understanding of risks across industry, policymakers, and our militaries in order to better inform regulation and capital allocation. So as we think about the shift from a fossil fuel-based economy towards a minerals-based economy and managing emerging dependencies and the risk of economic coercion, I think we can all agree that China's dominant position in the critical minerals market is uncontested, leveraging its position to benefit its own state-owned enterprises and undermining Western efforts to build up capacity across the value chain, so from upstream all the way through to downstream. We've seen that China's no-limits partnership with Russia has manifested itself in meddling and spreading misinformation campaigns to block lithium extraction in Serbia. Upstream, we've seen that as early as 2020, graphite exports into Sweden have had detrimental impacts on Europe's efforts to build the downstream, so speaking specifically of the battery industry now. And of course, predatory pricing models continue to systemically undermine the Western efforts to build capacity as prices are being held artificially low. And so as we think about, categorizing risk and political risk and project risk, financing risk, I think we need to continue, using trade defense tools. I know that's a bit controversial at the moment, and thinking about tariffs perhaps in a tiered approach to basically, higher tariffs on fully manufactured goods through to lower tariffs on raw materials so that we can build the downstream in Europe, because of course we can have all the minerals we need, but if we don't have the downstream manufacturing capacity and production capacity, then that's all for nothing. And then I think looking towards project risk, I think, Europe has had this kind of hear no evil, see no evil approach to across extractive industries, which has resulted in dwindling social acceptance, and it's frankly a little bit naive and in some cases hypocritical. It means that we find ourselves importing goods and continuing to import fossil fuels, more than a billion euros every day into the EU, and these are goods that tend not to meet the standards that we set for ourselves. And then I think in terms of sort of looking at regulatory risk, I think this was brought up earlier, but the case that across member states and across ministries and departments, mining is still spread across, be it Ministry of Natural Resources, be it Ministry of Economy, and there are still divergencies across in approaches to minerals extraction there. Maybe just to close these opening remarks. I think with regards to the topic of the panel, I think we need to continue with the momentum that we have in terms of our engagement in international partnerships, but also recognizing that defense critical minerals are have vastly different markets to the minerals that we have, I think, a better understanding of for the energy transition. So to give just a brief example, things like antimony and germanium, which are co-products, byproducts of other minerals, we need to consider that their production will be dictated by macroeconomics, and this can have advantages and disadvantages in that it lowers the cost of production, but also market volatility is harder to manage. And maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Isabelle. You've given us an awful lot to chew on. I can think of lots of questions myself, but I should let Cecilia come in. We've heard a little bit about barriers. We've heard a little bit about need for regulatory change. Your business as a lawyer is to enable a business, to help your clients to be able to trade in a secure and predictable way. There's been considerable comment so far to say that we're not in a predictable environment. So how do you, as an enabler, as a facilitator, work with your clients? I would actually find it very interesting to know a little bit more. And I hope that Mr. Decellier is not one of your clients, is he? No, okay, all right. But please.
Thank you for this question. Thank you for the invitation. My firm is actually dedicated in a large part to the defense industry, and in particular the French defense industry, that we advise on navigating all these challenges that stem from the geopolitical tension. And the first thing that is really important to gather is that there is no homogeneous, at the moment, understanding among the defense industry of how global and complex the supply chain is at the moment. We still have this idea of goods and technologies appearing on our shelves without really understanding how complex everything is behind the curtain. So there is a discrepancy among the defense industry, and it doesn't really stem from the size of the corporations or the nature of the technologies that they produce. It's really at the heart of this understanding lies a culture and persons. So, for instance, you will find small or medium-sized companies that have one person sometimes that has a significant interest in the supply chain or in the minerals or the industry, that will really build a culture within the company that will build a vision for a secure supply chain. And sometimes you have bigger corporations that don't even have this understanding or this will to investigate how it works, and that will continue in 2025 business as usual. So it's really something that we need to understand, that there is no, at the moment, global vision within the industry, and this is why it's very important for policymakers, be it the EU or on the national domestic level, to promote this idea for the defense industry to take an interest in this. And what is really also important to understand is that it's really hard for companies. You were talking about certainty. There is no certainty at the moment. And nowadays, companies need to understand that supply chains are the result of political, geopolitical challenges, but also law, engineering, and sometimes I think even theology. You need to have a theological understanding of what's going on, because you need to understand that the other doesn't think like you. And I remember when prior to the Russian invasion, many observers, even the most acute ones, were thinking that this never going to happen, even a few weeks prior to the invasion, because it would harm Russia, because it would not be the most rational choice or decision to invade Ukraine. But you need to understand that other countries do not really think like us, and especially for our rivals, I think you need to understand that they have this willingness to harm themselves also in order to harm us even more, which is not something that we are really used to in the West. So this culture, this mindset needs a lot of adjustments.
Thank you, Cecilia. It's very, 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 very profound. I think that's absolutely right. And maybe if we put it in a slightly different context, you're reminding us how little we remember from COVID. You know, global supply chains disrupted. And we always assumed somehow it was going to get better. And that same denial, if you like, seems to exist today. So, you know, nobody likes going to the dentist, but you do remember how much it hurts. So it's interesting. So thank you. It's a very, very relevant and welcome observation. Christian, I suspect that you have an awful lot to say. You listened to our keynote speaker that addressed many of your priorities. I guess you could probably fill, you know, an entire afternoon with everything you want to say. You will? Okay. But please. In terms of NATO, I think, you know, we are primarily a mining audience with respect to our other guests, but what do you want from our sector? What are your priorities?
Thank you first for having me. Let me tell you, the reason I came was because of the title. Yeah, it was really appealing because I deal with geopolitics. So if there was a sort of a label for what I'm about to tell you, it's like you might not be interested in geopolitics, but geopolitics is interested in you. So that would be one message. So get with the times. But like to use the topic or the sort of the title of the conference, the war below for Europe's defense. Let me start drilling from the top, and then I will get to the raw materials, I promise. But I'm a strategist. I look at sort of many other issues, and I will not have an answer for you, but I will give you a framework of how to think about the problem. So it's not the fish that I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you a fishing rod. With my little intervention. So let's go. So perhaps not surprisingly, let me start with Russia, right? Kind of like what the DG Defis did as well. And I think to us, Russia will remain the most significant and direct threat to our security. It's ramping up its defense spending, but more importantly, when you look at it, and that's actually going to be a leitmotif for my intervention, it has moved to a war economy. It's actually rewiring what it does and how it does it. It's rapidly rebuilding its armed forces, and it's not alone, right? It's actually building things on Chinese technology, backed by Iranian drones and North Korean troops and missiles. So this is the message here is Putin has not given up his ambition to reshape the global security order, and he's not alone. So there's that. A second piece that I would like to put on the table is that, you know, there are these questions that we have about the strength of the transatlantic bond, United States commitment to the European security, and indeed a lot of that rhetoric is quite tough. And there are difficult debates between Europe and America over trade, over tariffs, and there are calls to revive ideas of European autonomy. But when we look at this sort of unfolding scene, it strikes us that this is not the time to go it alone. And that's a message number 2 here. Not for Europe and not for North America. I think the global security challenges ahead are too great for any of us to face on our own. Right? That's sort of you know, no matter how powerful, I think you cannot go it alone. And that's why, to us, this sort of strong transatlantic alliance remains the bedrock of our defense. And by the way, a stronger European side, strong European allies are also a unique strategic asset for the United States. So it's not a mutually exclusive proposition. And that is important to bear in mind going forward. But it is also clear going forward, and now I'm coming more to the NATO piece, that the US commitment to NATO comes with a clear expectation that European allies and Canada take more responsibility for our shared security. So I think if there's a sort of a space to watch, I think that's going to be our Hague summit, where we will look to start a new chapter for the transatlantic alliance. And if there was a banner, a slogan, I think it would be stronger and more lethal NATO. That's where we're going. And this means setting ambitious capability targets for allied forces based on our defense plans. We're not back at the Cold War levels, but this is the direction of travel. Yes, this will require substantially higher levels of spending. You're not going to get around it. Yes, this requires more forces and capabilities underpinned by greater investments. So that's the demand signal. That's where we're headed. And talking on the demand signal, this is going to be about air and missile defense. This is going to be about long-range weapons. This is going to be about logistics. This is going to be about large land maneuver formations. These are the top priorities, right? So those of you sitting in the audience, that's the demand signal. And when it comes to that demand signal, I would put it to you that this is not going to happen without expanding the defense industrial base. I would actually put it to you that quite often it's not the money that is the problem. It's actually, the ability to absorb all of that. Because I think we're playing catch up. I can sort of something that the previous panelists also said. So in many ways, the sort of defense industrial capacity, I think, is a must going forward, not something that is sort of to be done or considered voluntarily. Yes, we are producing shells, ships, missiles. We have done so in the past, but I think the signal here is that we need to go further and faster. Right? That's what we have done. What brought us here is not going to help us in the future. And there's going to be a duality in this regard, in this challenge. Yes, a lot of it is about our deterrence and defense, but it's also going to be about Ukraine. And a lot of that work will unfold via our cooperation with partners. Yes, it's about Indo-Pacific, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and Korea. But I would specifically highlight and pause a little bit on the role of the European Union, because that's the title of the conference as well. An essential partner for NATO. This cooperation has significantly expanded in recent years. We hope it will continue to grow. And as we all urgently need to invest more in defense, I think the EU really has the potential to play an important role in this regard. And let me dispel any rumors in this regard. NATO wants to see a more capable European defense. We want to see this European defense interoperable with NATO and complementing what we do, right? And once again, it's not a mutually exclusive proposition. However, there are some aspects in that shift that need to be considered. And let me come back to your question, Sarah, as well in the previous panel or to the presenter. I think when you look at what's happening, and we have tried to come to grips with it with some of our speeches, we're not experiencing war, but it's not peace either, right? So what you have is this, sometimes I call it strategic competition, sort of activities below the threshold, call it what you want. But I think what you need to do is to make sure that the regulatory environment is designed for that environment, right? I think the feeling that I sometimes have is that the regulatory environment is designed exclusively for peacetime. That's not the case. And this is all for you as well that are sort of dealing with raw materials. Yes, we're dealing with competition rules. You have workplace health and safety. You have environmental rules. You have customs procedures, border crossings. There's a lot of red tape, and that's not really sort of conducive to actually competing in that strategic competition. So that needs to be sort of taken a look at. Sounds dreadfully boring, I know, but at the same time, you need to reduce the risk so that you don't tie yourself up to knots and hamstring yourself in order to get off the starting line. Another message here would be that, and let me go back to what I just said earlier, I think I would like to highlight the involvement of non-EU allies in EU defense efforts in this regard. And I think that certainly applies also to raw materials. When we look at the supply chains, when we look at the way how things are done, it's clear that North America and Europe are intertwined. Right? Let's use the F-35. F-35 is a fusion, really, of cutting-edge technology from American, British, Dutch, and Italian engineering, manufactured across the alliance, supporting jobs in the United States, but also here in Europe. Right? So it would be difficult to somehow cut it out and sort of examine these pieces separately. The United States stepping up its munitions production in partnership with companies from a range of NATO allies and partners. Turkey helping to build ammunition plants in Texas, and gunpowder from Europe and Australia fueling American munitions factories. So think about it that way. So bottom line here, I think when I look at this, is that a strengthened defense industry across Europe and North America will help make our alliance more capable and better able to deliver on its core task. Finally, I'm done with drilling. I'm going to get to the raw materials piece now. I would say that a lot of what I'm talking about would be difficult, if not impossible, to achieve without access to defense-critical raw materials. These will be essential for the allied defense industry. And not surprisingly, when we look at our list and when you compare that to the EU list, it's pretty much the same. You come to the same conclusion at the end of the day. Yes, graphite, aluminium, you have cobalt. You know, in other words, these are the sort of the minerals that everybody's going to be after. And consequently, the availability and secure supply of these materials are going to be vital for us to maintain our technological edge and also operational readiness. And disruptions in the supply could impact the production of essential defense equipment, but I will also put it to will impact defense and deterrence. Right? So that's the upstream impact of when we're talking about raw materials. Now, I do not want to explore in depth the impact of trade war and what is happening right now, and that's because this is not within the remit of NATO. But it is noteworthy that China placed export restrictions on rare earth elements as part of its response to US tariffs. Right? So, in other words, what this means is leaving, I suspect, many manufacturers scrambling for fresh supplies of the critical minerals they have relied upon for decades. But I think, and that's the point that DG Def has made, it also demonstrates China's ability to weaponize its dominance over the mining and processing of the critical minerals. For end users, for companies, of course, these restrictions underscore the importance of supply diversification. So looking at how to de-risk with different levers. But let me go back to one of the questions from the audience. I think for the governments, this means you need to look at how to build alternative supply chains, how to do strategic stockpiling, how to improve recycling, how to develop substitute materials of defense-critical strategic material. In other words, quite a lot of these issues tend to be market externalities. They're treated as a business cost. So without a state stepping in, I'm afraid this is going to be still treated as a business cost, which nobody wants to absorb as part of their business model. And last but not least, when you look at what's happening, I suspect there's going to be stronger voices talking about securing an end-to-end rare earth supply chain to protect industrial and national security. Back to you, Mark.
Christian, thank you. And thank you for reminding us, despite our daily dose of news from the financial markets and the White House, that Russia is the greater threat as opposed to Mr. Trump. I think we should remember that. One more round to the panel, and then I will invite questions from the audience. I'm slightly concerned about time. So, Mr. Mandl, one priority for the European Parliament. What should we do, or what should you do?
Security and economy, and it sounds like two priorities, but it's one. This is a brief question with a brief response, but thanks also for stating that Russia is the greater threat than President Trump. It's sad that we even have to emphasize that, but of course it's true and it's important to mention. I mean, when I say there are powers who want to colonialize us, it must be not, let's say, said without mentioning that Trump is democratically legitimized, and we have to deal with this US administration, especially parliamentarily. This week's Friday, the largest delegation I, in my 8 years in European Parliament, have ever seen from the US Congress, bipartisan, will come to us more than ever to talk to us. And I see that as a positive signal that they also know the roof is on fire. I mean, you were talking about fire alarms before. We will not experience it today, not literally, but politically the roof is on fire, because I'm a very transatlantic-oriented person. Many in the US Congress are, but the current US president is not. I mean, we have to emphasize that this is the case. And to embrace the situation as it is and deal with it as best as possible. But this is one more reason, maybe through this backdoor and in a very harsh way, Europe is now investing in security, as others and me, not only one partisan, multi-partisan, have advocated for years already before Putin, Russia's war of aggression and so on. So now finally we seem to be about to achieve the so-called NATO goals. In the end, it's goals for our own security, and it's signing up for a security insurance. And this does not go without also a focus on economy. This is why a priority must be security and economy and security. And I mean, I was very critical on the last European Commission for obvious reasons, over-regulation and so on. But at the same time, I have to say, let's keep unity as much as possible. I mean, we have on this panel at least 2 European states represented, which are not EU member states, by the way, UK and Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, which doesn't help in the end. I mean, when it comes to unity, I also have to emphasize that, but we will overcome it, maybe the next generation or the one after. But in the end, unity is important, and also to stick to these priorities. And even as a parliamentarian criticizing the Commission very often, let's also praise if the Commission is doing something positive. And at the moment, the proposals we receive in the Parliament are good, from omnibus to defense. Also what the Member States receive from the Commission is good. How they can circumvent Member States who would not be aligned, Member States governments, I mean, who would not be aligned with that, is good. So, and maybe last point, what I have to focus on every day, because I speak to citizens, constituents every day, is when we talk about 800 billion spent for security, 650 of them with an opportunity for the member states' budgets and 150 from the Commission, then this is not money throwing out of the window, it is investment in our own industrial base. As Mr. Lifländer has pointed out, it's about our own industrial base, it's about our own production, innovation in Europe, and I mean, we have economic troubles of major dimensions, so it will be good to invest for security and economy again, so these priorities will remain.
Thank you very much. Isabelle, I'm actually a Cypriot, but I have a Cypriot passport, not a British one. I do have a British one, but anyway.
What's the second one? You have UK?
I'm Cypriot.
Cypriot?
Yeah. But I live in Greece. I live in Greece, and the reason I mention this is I live in a country that has a greater degree of preparedness and has lived with a different reality. And the reality of Cyprus is a sad truth, and to anyone in that divided island, something that you can't escape. So
that's a good compliment to Turkey, has been mentioned. I didn't want to be too political on that, but thanks for stating that. Let's leave it there.
No adverse comments from me. Isabelle, there's been a lot of talk about how do we deal with supply chain fragility? How do we deal with basically procurement, getting what we need without really having understood previously why we needed it. So in addressing that security of supply, can we draw upon any relevant examples in your experience and expertise?
I'm really grateful for that question, because that was what I wanted to share based on what the prior panelists had alluded to about, what does regulation look like in wartime and what does regulation look like in peacetime? And I think, you know, in the United States, there has been a culture of collaboration across corporates, policymakers, and the military that has made for, I would argue, strong decisions on reshoring certain minerals. And to give a couple examples, the Department of Defense in 2005, I believe, invoked the Defense Production Act to effectively reshore beryllium. And beryllium is actually mostly located in the United States. So 60% of the world's beryllium is in the United States, but it had become economically unfeasible to continue the extraction and processing of beryllium in the US. And effectively, by invoking this act, they were able to work with Materion Corporation, which is formerly known as Brush-Wellman, to, you know, contribute basically engineering design, equipment costs for the facility, and operational services. So effectively, a very strong public-private partnership and an example of what is needed in Europe for similar, basically very low volume, small market cap minerals. The other example is titanium, where the Department of Defense does financially support the titanium industry, and in addition to that has clauses whereby the Department of Defense is not able to buy non-US produced titanium. So I think these are two examples of effective collaboration across military, corporates, and policymakers. And maybe just to add that I think we should really see this moment as an opportunity, because the defense sector has historically been a breeding ground of innovation. The examples being semiconductors, what else? Oh, permanent magnets as well, having originally been developed for the U.S. Air Force to improve radar performance. And so I think it's not one, you know, without the other. It's all of the above. And so this is really an opportunity also for Europe's startups and scale-ups to innovate in this sector.
Thank you, Isabelle. Cecilia, I was very drawn to your comment earlier about understanding the others, or the other, as you put it. And I sympathize with that greatly. That, I suppose, in its purest form, in practical terms, people like us, is dealing with foreign trade, working with people across borders. And yes, it takes a long time to build a new aluminium smelter, but you're still going to need the aluminium. Where are you going to get it from? But how do you then at the same time develop your expertise in order to protect your supply chain? As a lawyer, what issues do you see as relevant to that this audience should know about? And number two, what do you think the answers to those issues are?
Yeah, I've been advising my clients for 2 years now to get ready for what we call bifurcation. I've been trying to advise them to get ready for the worst case scenario, in which you could not, at some point, you would have to choose between trading with the US and their allies on the one hand, and with China and theirs on the other hand. And this must be taken at the level of the companies, but also the policymakers. And it needs foresight, it needs vision, it needs cooperation. And I'm following up on what Isabelle was saying. The US has a large advance on the EU on this regard. They've been daring to test and try and make errors. You mentioned initiatives that were successful, but we also need to take into account that the US bet on plans that failed, like Molycorp, which ended up being a failure. But that is a success in that it teaches a lot. And we need to have this entrepreneurial mindset in the EU today. And the topic of investment is important. We need money, we need funding, as was mentioned earlier, but we also need to invest wisely and in a smart way, in a collaborative way. And for instance, I'm alluding to the 47 projects that were discussed and announced recently. I was reading that 22 of those 47 projects are still lithium related, which translates, which suggests a mindset that is still very focused on the green transition. Mm-hmm. Which is something that, of course, is important, but needs to be updated in order to take into account the challenges of, as Christian was saying, not war, but not peace anymore. So this mindset also is a bit backward and a bit dated. So this is also something that needs to be taken into account. And the other major flaw that I see in this project is that it encourages competition, when I think what we need today is planning, which is not something that we are really used to doing in the EU, but that we need to consider. So I would say, to answer your question, more planning, more vision, more cooperation, and an updated mindset that takes into account the current challenges.
Thank you. So, Christian, we need to make decisions, we need to enable those decisions, and we need to implement those decisions. Why is that so hard for some European countries? Why is it so hard for the European Union? Whereas in NATO, you have a set of imperatives that you wish to address, but it's also hard. If you look at some of these European countries, you have health services that deliver world-leading service. It's a value judgment. It's a central planning. It's a commitment of cost, and there's implementation. It's a social good. Defense is also a social good. Why is it so hard?
You should ask Lukas that.
No. I'm blocking that. I'm just doing my job here.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, very few people have been elected to office just on a security agenda. I think all politics fundamentally is local. And what voters, what we all care about are very simple things. Do I have a job? Do I have healthcare? Can my children go to school? There are these very simple elementary things that we need. And quite often, it's the same remark that I made before. I mean, when it comes to security, it almost tends to be sort of, it's a market externality. I mean, it's just, you don't really think about it. I guess in many ways you don't feel that you lack security until you lose it.
Right.
Yeah. So I think there's something about sort of how do we sort of think about the world around us, but also how are these things explained to us? For all I care, what happened in 2014 in Crimea and in 2022 in Ukraine, I think that sort of focuses the mind. So it is about sort of prioritizing short-term versus long-term objectives, but it's also about sort of the way sort of incentives work, and all politics being local. I think going forward, there are going to be some quite tough discussions because money is not for free. We want to make that pivot here in Europe. In essence, what you will have is just free options, right? I mean, either you borrow money, you take it from other existing budget lines, or you increase taxes in order to accommodate that what is still ahead. And this needs to be explained to people. This needs to be explained to the voters so that they understand the case for it. We are very generous indeed when it comes to social healthcare in Europe. It could very well be that some of it will have to be at the expense of these very generous welfare packages. And well, that's not going to go down well, right? So there's the sort of the constant election cycle. There's the need to explain to the voters and the need to get the mandate in order to govern. So there are a lot of challenges. And I think if there's one thing that I really hope, it's that our legislators also stand up to the challenge. Because let me very quickly go back to that sort of unpeace. The lack of war, but also not sort of peace. I think in our democratic part of the world, it's the rule of law that tells you what is okay and what is not okay. And I think it's the legislators that will be thrust into that sort of situation the most, with the regulation, with the laws, that kind of need, in other words, our legislators need to accommodate that strategic competition in the kinds of rules, the kinds of laws that they create. Easier said than done. Our competitors, when you look at the authoritarian regimes, do not have to worry about it. We do. So that compact, that social compact that we will form every 4 years in the elections, it will be fast, but you need to explain this to people so that you get the mandate and you also update the laws in order to be competitive as part of that strategic competition. I'm hopeful. I don't think that we have lost it, but I think there needs to be a lot of education and explaining also to the voters what's at stake, what is visible and very tangible, and what is something that you might actually lose if you don't pay attention to the long-term security objectives.
Yeah, well said. I have to agree with that, very much so. We used to see here, I think it was a French newspaper headline talking about climate change and what had to be sacrificed in order to make a genuine attempt to address climate change. So the equation came down to a very simple headline, the end of the month versus the end of the world. And I think we've just had a wake-up call as to what that actually may mean. And I pass that thought to the audience and invite questions. A couple of hands have shot up immediately. Wonderful, I like that. So we've heard from you already, so I'll take your question second. The lady at the back, could you please introduce yourself? Yes.
Hello. Oh. Thank you very much. My name is Emily Stewart and I work for the NGO Global Witness.
Welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to address something that's kind of been across, I think, today's talks, but I think that the question inherently is probably for Christian. We've heard quite a lot about deregulation, and I think I'm kind of failing to see how that relates to some of the things that we've been talking about, because I think a lot of the mining industries that I've spoken to won't necessarily point directly to deregulation as being their biggest issue, but actually the time it takes to get permitting because there's basically a lack of staff. And in Europe, and I think one of our question askers pointed to this, a lack of investment being quite a big issue for us. So thinking about the fact that regulation might not be the issue and talking about our long-term security, first of all, Christian, from NATO, there's a lot of really great research about how climate change is a threat multiplier, also environmental deregulation. So we know that this is something that could potentially threaten us in the future. Alongside that, you said that it's really imperative that we don't go this alone. So in terms of Europe and our ability to get minerals from the rest of the world, I think it's really important that we're making sure that we're putting our best foot forward. And what's our USP when it comes to us and the rest of the world? Well, we don't have the money like the Americans, and we don't have the supply chains like Europe, but what we do have is a great reputation for ESG standards. And so I think if we go down this pathway of deregulation, what we're showing ourselves to be is potentially disingenuous and maybe losing that USP. And that could be a threat for our future security long term. And I'm sorry to do a question, not a comment, but we've talked a lot about what a wartime and a peacetime economy looks like. And we haven't heard a lot about energy and resource efficiency, which I think is also really important if we're on a kind of wartime economy footing. Thank you.
I'll ask Isabelle to answer the second part of that question. So resource efficiency and energy efficiency, please. But Christian, please, the first part.
I need more data points. I mean, maybe sort of some members of the audience can pipe up as well and sort of add their sort of voice to it. What I picked up is different signals from the market in this regard. Some say, and I'm not actually here talking only about the sort of the critical raw materials sector. What I hear it from is from different sectors. Well, I mean, I used to do cyber for a long time. So lots of companies came to me, lots of actually law enforcement people came to me saying that, well, dare I say, well, now that the GDPR is going to be overhauled, I can say that GDPR was kind of limiting. So by the time they actually got to the perpetrators, they had to get permissions from all of the people because the IP addresses were the private data, right? So I think there needs to be a good balance struck in this regard, in terms of the regulation that is in place and the overarching goal of staying competitive. I just want to clarify a little bit. I'm not arguing for getting rid of the regulation. I think regulation is very much needed because of the market externalities. Once again, sometimes there are issues, particularly when it comes to security quite often, where market doesn't get it because there's no incentive to improve. What I'm arguing for is a smarter regulation in a sense that would actually address this sort of strategic competition. Because sometimes you need to adjudicate between different interests. You might be concerned about environment, and that is important, but at the same time, you need to put that on balance with other interests that are at stake. And to a certain extent, I'm fighting for that corner, making that sort of security and defense voice heard. But I'm certainly, I think regulation is a great thing, but it's quite difficult. So that's why all of the EU colleagues, by the way, they happen to be also good friends. I really keep my fingers crossed that they get it right, because it can be quite difficult to actually achieve that great balance, not only at the EU level, but also at the national level, by the way. Where sometimes, unfortunately, when I look at it, some want to be more Catholic than a pope, and then you get into trouble with all of that regulation. I'm not sure that it's a good thing.
Thank you. Isabelle, would you like to comment?
Happy to. This was one of the points that I wanted to raise earlier with regards to project risk. And so obviously the cost of energy in Europe is still an important factor in deterring investors from making investments in Europe. What we have found is needed for the downstream is particularly production-focused support. So be that in the form of state aid or other. Obviously, organizationally, we believe that energy is one of the strongest determinants of growth and prosperity, and that means that we need to work towards reducing energy costs. This will help us unlock projects in Europe. And while Trump might have done us a little favor by reducing gas prices temporarily, these are still very volatile markets, and we need to work towards domestic production of energy and dispatchable energy, so including nuclear, and then ensure that we have the grid resilience, grid security that is needed to transmit energy efficiently. And then maybe just to add on to a point with regards to the circular economy and the role of recycling and all of this, I think we need to still overcome challenges that are limiting us from moving black mass within the EU. So right now it's easier to export black mass from France to China than it is to move it from France to Germany. And that is a security risk, because if we see minerals security and maintaining minerals within Europe to be an economic and national security imperative, then we need to strengthen the single market in that regard, and also recognize that recycling will be particularly complex with regard to the duality of uses of specific minerals, because, you know, in the defense sector, so cobalt and nickel are needed in very high purity forms, whereas are obviously used in sulfates and carbonates for batteries. So I think that's a level of complexity that that I think we are beginning to overcome also in the EU.
I had a question over there. Alex, there's a question over here. No, don't worry, the microphone is coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and all the comments. I would have one other question to you, Mr. Lifländer. Actually, yeah, sorry for that, but it's on Greenland. So I would be very interested to have your views on this, because it has been really said in the news that this was an issue when it comes to CRM. But actually, when you look at the figures, it's about 1 million of tons that could be exploited there. When you compare it to China, it's about 44 million of tons, and Brazil, it's 21. So it's not so much, but I also read some news that were saying basically there's a big issue for the US when it comes to Russian submarines. And there it's not just about trade war, it's tensions between the EU and the US. So I'm just wondering to what extent you see the CRM issue being more important when it comes to Greenland, or whether it's more about defense as such. And how do you see it going?
Let's zoom out of Greenland. I'm going to sort of take a rain check on that question, if I may.
Yeah, I think you were very kind when we first met. There are some things that Christian can't really talk about, and but thank you for the question. Yeah. So I will take one more question from the gentleman over there, and possibly one more after that, before I ask the panel to wrap up. Please identify yourself, sir.
Thank you. Maciej Strzemiec. I work in the research department of the European Parliament. And my question is a bit, when I look here at the title, Made in Europe, for Europe, Mined in Europe, I'm just thinking maybe it's not the right perspective, because we all know that most of our materials are actually outside of Europe. And that's why, you know, we've been talking here a bit, you know, Japan, a bit South Korea, but Australia, Canada. But I'm just thinking we didn't talk so much about, you know, Latin America, you know, South Africa. And I'm just thinking, so my question is a bit like, shouldn't we change our thinking? And, you know, a bit like think about, you know, I liked what you say about, you know, thinking like, you know, trying to imagine what the others need and so on. And I'm just thinking maybe we cannot get out of this puzzle just thinking about ourselves, and we need to reach out and make strong partnerships, but then with whom? This is the question.
You do realize you're in a room full of European miners. I can't guarantee your security. I'm sorry. But please, who would like to respond?
Mark pointed at me, so I feel obliged to do so.
Please.
Well, great European Parliament Research Service is represented today. Happy to see you. First, I have to reveal something. There was obviously a preparation call for today's panel discussion. My head of office joined it, and she told me that in this prep call, Mr. Lifländer said he cannot talk about current recent policy issues. And I was concerned when she told me that could be very boring, but it was quite the opposite. I mean, Christian told us a lot about really, really relevant long-term strategic issues, but I completely understand it's impossible to talk about Greenland, for example, since two NATO members, even the one of them also recently a European Common Defense Policy member, Denmark, the last one who joined that. Covering this in crazy political times, it's impossible to comment. So I want to commend really the great approach of Mr. Lifländer. I want to respond to what Ms. Stewart said before. And I'm very frank and direct. The Green Deal was neither green nor a deal. And I'm happy we overcame that. I mean, it didn't work at all. The whole idea was to save the environment of our planet, but the others didn't join. And we are only 5% of world's population, maybe 4, and 2-point-something% of world's soil. So this was not the right approach. Security and economy will remain the right approach also in the side of the value of protecting the environment. When Russia wins, it will also not be good for the environment. When China will overtake more and more of companies and sites all over the world, it will also not be good for the environment. So to defend ourselves will remain important. And while all politics is local, as Christian has stated, I also think all politics is security politics. All politics is about a core business of taking care of security. And also, especially when it comes to our part of the world, our civilization and our values, defending freedom. And this is why I want to add to the 3 options we have, Christian has pointed out. I think it was taking others' money via debt, increasing taxes, or allocating money differently. The 4th option is not the 4th option, it's an additional option and the necessary one to foster the economy. I mean, to have growth again on European soil. And this is connected to freedom, this is connected to deregulation, as we have pointed out today. This is connected to lift burden on European companies, and this is also connected to fostering the European mining industry, to exploit our own natural resources, to exploit our own raw materials. And of course, I mean, European Parliament Research Service representative is right that we need these connections with like-minded partners on the world, but the question is who is like-minded, who will remain like-minded sustainably. So to take care of ourselves will remain to be important. While I still think I'm an idealist here, I still think in a world full of more and more confrontation, the European approach will remain the cooperation. But with more autonomy and more self-responsibility, more strength in the end to the outside. And we have a new agreement with South Africa. I think the Commission is about to sign it or has already signed it, especially in the field of raw materials and others. But this must not harm the European mining industry. It must rather make our supply chains better. Due to our supply chain rules in the last mandate, decided on in the last mandate, I voted against in the European Parliament, we have isolated Europe. So it's good that we have stopped the clock in place now. It's good that it will be redrawn, and it's good that we will be stronger to the outside, and by that we also protect our values, including preserving the environment.
Thank you. I have time for one more question. No? So in which case I'll invite the panelists. Mr. Mandl, will I take those to be your closing remarks, or is there anything else you'd like to share?
I highly appreciated this panel. And I've also heard in the preparation call, it was a big fun to talk to you, Mark. And this was, I mean, having said that about the Green Deal, you talked in the beginning about following the green signs when there's fire on the roof. And I was thinking, this is really the only case where you should follow the green signs. And here I accept it. In the other political fields, I would not accept that. So thank you again for this interesting panel, and for all of you for traveling to Brussels for this purpose.
Isabelle, perhaps I could ask you, what would you, to paraphrase JFK, what would you like from them in order to make our lives better in this context? What should they do?
I guess I kind of wanted to end on the note of cooperation and to say that international fora such as the Mineral Security Partnership live on, and depending on what the United States involvement in that will ultimately be, they do live on, and I think this is really the right place to ensure that we can uphold and live by our standards within the mineral sector. committees of the MSP, so the Minerals Investment Network, are also key to unlocking private capital and having discussions around things like price floors and yeah, continue to be relevant in spite of turbulence on the other side of the Atlantic.
Thank you, Isabelle. Cecilia, please, any comments you would like to make? I leave it entirely up to you.
Thanks. I was thinking just about how we got here. You know, I did a bit of reading to come here. I was interested in reading that the first unofficial embargo by China on raw materials happened in 2010. So 15 years ago already, after a dispute regarding the Senkaku Islands between Japan and China. That was the first time China decided to leverage its power over the raw materials supply chain. Shortly after that, a US congresswoman understood the stakes, proposed the first Raw Materials Act, but it was too early. And here we are 15 years later, trying to understand the danger and the stakes of this upper hand by China on this supply chain. So I think I just hope that the picture is clearer for everyone in the room today, and that more collaboration, more vision among the EU members will be born from this.
Cecilia, thank you very much. Christian, you've carried perhaps a little more of the load on this panel, so time to give it back.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. No, I mean, it's very simple. I mean, there's the famous saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think now's the opportunity, and that would be my message to this community as well. I think what you're looking at, to quote President Roosevelt, is this sort of rendezvous with history. That's what you're looking at. And I think there's change ahead. There's change ahead when it comes to, I think, the way, and that's what I heard from DG Defis, the way we look at regulation. I think there's change ahead when it comes to the demand signal. There's change ahead when it comes to sort of how do we do that in Europe. And to be quite blunt, I think the European pillar of NATO will have to get stronger. I do not see this as mutually sort of exclusive proposition to what I've been saying. So there's change ahead. And I think I would certainly encourage us to seize that moment, that good crisis in this regard. Because, I mean, in some ways, I mean, you can look at it as glass half empty or half full. So it's really what we make out of it, and I think what this community will make out of it. I think that what I sense is that there's willingness to change things around and to take a fresh look.
Thank you, Christian. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll bring matters to a close. Allow me just to say a few words. First of all, standing at the back are two ladies that have the same name. There are two Annas. They not only have the same name, but they live together. And I believe they've already started the dinner, which is waiting for you on the other side of those doors. So please join us for a glass of something and a bite to eat. And don't hold it against them. I'm sure they didn't eat very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's been an honor to moderate this panel. Thank you, all of you. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you to the audience for some stimulating questions. Please.